That's what God says. Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your watch care over us, your protection and your care. You've kept us safe through this week, and we want to thank you. As we come to study your word, we want to ask for a blessing, that you would be with us and that you would teach us. Help us to understand in a clearer way the truths for the times in which we live. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So this morning we was looking at this reference, December 1850, James White, Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, page 13, paragraph 6. And it began by saying, "It was the united testimony of Second Advent lecturers and papers when standing on the original faith that the publication of the chart was a fulfillment of Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. And it's the 1843 chart that he's referring to. And we spent some time looking at Habakkuk chapter 2. In fact, we spent quite a lot of time, most of that study, looking at chapter 1, if you remember. So I just want to turn back there because we want to make just one or two more connections. We went Habakkuk chapter 1 and 2. In fact, we went through most of chapter 1 and the first 3 verses of chapter 2. We saw that Habakkuk had his ministry in the time period probably of Ammon, but before Josiah, and maybe towards the latter part of Manasseh's reign. So it's in this time period here. The H is for Habakkuk. And we saw that there was going to be this rise, this miraculous rise of a power. Who was that power? The Chaldeans or Babylonians. And the two superpowers were the Assyrians and the Egyptians. They're basically the people who are ruling the then known world, always in tension, warring one against another. And we saw, although I didn't prove it, that you can line up Manasseh with the time of the end, and you can run all the way through, and Zedekiah would be the close of probation, the destruction of God's people, Jerusalem. And when we take the same concept, the same idea, and bring it here into Revelation 11, we see that in that history, when you get to the time of the end, there are two superpowers, Great Britain and France. And miraculously, silently even, there's a nation that's going to rise up, and that nation is the United States. And we see that in the story of Habakkuk, this nation that's silently rising up, the Babylonians or Chaldeans, they're the ones that God is going to use to do what? To come and destroy God's people. And in the same way that this power that's going to miraculously rise here is going to be used to come and destroy God's people, because the United States are represented by chariots, horsemen and ships when they marry the papacy, as brought to view in Daniel 11 verse 40, which we already discussed. So this vision that's being spoken of here is what vision? what's the vision that speak? Oh, when I say here, we don't tell you what verse. Sorry, Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon table, that he may run that readeth it, for the vision is yet for an appointed time. So what did we say this vision was? The vision of chapter 1, verse 1, which is called the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. So the burden that he saw was the vision that he saw, and it's the same vision that he's now going to write and make plain upon tables. So hopefully we can see that connection. I know if you weren't here this morning, it may not be that easy to see, because I've just quickly recapped what we were speaking about. Habakkuk chapter 2 and chapter 3, James White speaks about that in this passage, doesn't he? Here, I'll read it again for us. It says, it was the united testimony of Second Advent lecturers and papers, when standing on the original faith, that the publication of the chart was a fulfillment of Habakkuk chapter 2 and chapter 3. So what's that saying? It's saying this, that there was a chart produced. When was that chart made? Do you know, Sister Wendy? Yeah, this one here. When was it made? It wasn't made in 1843. Do you know? It was produced in the year 1842. There was a general conference of Advent believers in May of this year. In May 1842. They came together, and one of them had this chart, Joshua V. Himes. And when he came, they all thought this was a great idea. They voted on it, and they decided to print how many copies? 300 printed 300 of these copies, and they were distributed to these Second Advent lecturers. So when they produced this chart, has everybody seen the 1843 chart? I haven't seen it. You don't have a copy here, do you? Okay. A pity. I've only got one on my computer. It'd be nice to see it, because I wanted us to see something which is really important, I think. We could do it in the next presentation. Would that be better? Yeah? Okay. So I'll remind me to make the point in the next one, and we'll put it onto the screen and we'll have a look at it. So let me go back to this one, and if we can remember to remind me to make that point. So we're reading this passage here. If the chart was a subject of prophecy, and those who deny it leave the original faith, then it follows that 457 BC was the year from which to date the 2300 days. It was necessary that 1843 should be the first published time, in order that the vision should tarry, or that there should be a tarrying time in which the virgin band was to slumber and sleep on the very subject of time, just before they were to be aroused by the midnight cry. Does that make sense to anybody, if not everybody? It would only make sense if you're familiar with the history of the Millerites. So let me do a little timeline. We've got 1798 and we've got 1844. And here in the year 1843, they're going to calculate that Daniel 8:14, the 2300 day prophecy. We all know the 2300 day prophecy, yes? Daniel 8:14. When they first did that calculation, they thought it was going to terminate in the year 1843. So that's what he's saying here. It was necessary that 1843 should be the first published time that Christ was going to return, in order that the vision should tarry. So when it says the vision should tarry, he's quoting from Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. It says in verse 3, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry." So when they do their initial calculation, they think that Jesus is going to come here, and when he doesn't come, what are they going to do? According to what we just read. Tarry. So I'll put TT for tarrying time. Does that make sense? Tarrying time. Now, was Jesus ever going to come in 1843? He never was. It was a mistake that they had made. When was he going to come? In 1844. Whatever the coming meant. So what he's saying is that there was this test that was brought to God's people. It was necessary that they first calculated 1843 in order to create this tarrying time, which is in agreement with the passage. But in reality, there wasn't a tarrying time, because Jesus always had planned to come here, and they'd made a mistake in their calculation. So I'm going to read it again and see if you can see in the words what I've just said here. It was the united testimony of Second Advent lecturers and papers, when standing on the original faith, that the publication of the chart was a fulfillment of Habakkuk. If the chart was a subject of prophecy, and those who deny it leave the original faith, then it follows that 457 BC, here, was the year from which to date the 2300 days. So the start date is here. They're going to go 2300 days. It was necessary that 1843 should be the first published time, in order that the vision should tarry, or that there should be a tarrying time in which the virgin band was to slumber and sleep on the great subject of time, just before they were to be aroused by the midnight cry. So this is October 22nd, and here there's a midnight cry. And at the midnight cry, what happens, according to what he just said? Just before they were aroused by the midnight cry. What does it mean to be aroused? Woke up. Because what have they already just done? Sleep. When did they sleep? Yep. So the vision should tarry, or there should be a tarrying time in which the virgin band was to slumber and sleep on the great subject of time. Okay. So we've got sleep here, and here they're going to wake up. And who's sleeping, did he say? Did we pick that up? It said, in which the virgin band. So the virgin band are sleeping. So we've got virgins here. So what's all this symbology? Where you've got virgins who are sleeping, who are tarrying or waiting, and they're going to be awoken at midnight when the cry is made. What is that story? The parable of the 10 virgins. Yes. You know what chapter that's found in, or what book? No? It's the book of Matthew. Matthew 25. So all of this story is Matthew 25. So what's James White done? He's taken the story of Habakkuk chapter 2, and we discussed what Habakkuk chapter 2 was talking about. It was talking about the burden of Habakkuk, which is the destruction of God's people because of their sins by the Chaldean bands. And when does that happen? Right here in the history of Zedekiah. It happens with Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah as the Babylonians come and destroy God's people. And he's going to take all of that history, that story, because he's going to pick up this phrase in Habakkuk chapter 2, and he's going to bring it into what history? Into this history. So he says that the vision that Habakkuk had, and Habakkuk's vision is here with Manasseh, Ammon, Josiah, kings that we've probably heard of. Some of the other ones we may not have heard of. We've heard of Jehoiakim, because it's found in the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 1, in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim. So in this history, which is the vision of Habakkuk, that's when it was originally fulfilled. He's going to take that vision and he's going to apply it to what history? Millerite history. Yeah? So this would be the Alpha, and this would be the Omega. The Alpha and the Omega. And how many kings do we have here? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 kings. Brother James, can you begin to see the connection that you've got 7 kings which are dealing with what vision? The vision of Habakkuk's vision. Now James White is going to say, Joshua, sorry. You've got 7 kings who are going to be dealing with Habakkuk's vision. But in this history, he's going to make the application that Habakkuk's vision is now going to be fulfilled in this history. And we've got 1798 all the way to 1844. And what's going to happen in this history, according to Revelation chapter 10? 7. The 7 thunders are going to start blowing. Yes? The 7 thunders are going to start blowing. So we've got 7 thunders in this history. And you've got 7 kings in this history. And this is the vision of Habakkuk. And this is the vision of Habakkuk. So therefore, you can show that the 7 thunders were typified by 7 kings. So the 7 kings and the 7 thunders are the same story. Does that make sense? So just to summarize, Habakkuk chapter 2 is fulfilled in this history. In fact, the whole of the book of Habakkuk is. And now James White, and not only James White, all of the preachers, all the 300 preachers agreed on one thing, that this chart here, this table, was a fulfillment of what vision? Habakkuk's vision. And that chart was produced in this history. Therefore, Habakkuk's vision must be fulfilled in this history. So this would be the Alpha and this would be the Omega. So the end, if you want to know what's going to happen at the end, you go back to the beginning. Yeah? And so we can do the same in our history. The Millerite history would be our beginning, our Alpha, and then we would have an Omega at the end. And so all the characteristics in the Millerite history are going to be brought into our own history. You can see that connection? But we read this passage here for one specific reason. It speaks about the original faith. And where did we get this subject of faith coming up from? 1 Timothy 4:1. 1 Timothy 4:1. It spoke about a group of people who did what? Departed from the faith. And they are hypocrites because they do what? They act. Verse 2. They speak lies. Anybody who speaks lies is an actor. By definition, isn't it? Because what they're in essence saying is, I'm speaking the truth. So if someone said, did you do that? And you said, no, it wasn't me. I didn't do that. You're lying, which means you're acting. You're acting as though you're innocent when you're guilty. Yeah? So we want to think, I want to read this a bit slower. It says, all of these people, these lecturers and the papers that they produced, They were standing on the original faith. What was the original faith? This chart. You will see it as we read it. It was the united testimony of Second Advent lecturers and papers when standing on the original faith. When they were standing on the original faith, this is what they believed. They believed that the publication of the chart was a fulfillment of Habakkuk chapter 2. Yeah? So they believed the production of this chart fulfilled the story of Habakkuk. That's what they believed. And that was the original faith. If the chart was a subject of prophecy, so this is a rhetorical question, was this chart a subject of prophecy or not? Yeah. Because it fulfills Habakkuk chapter 2. Were they correct or were they incorrect?
Correct.
They were correct when they made that assertion. They assert that the production of this chart fulfills Habakkuk chapter 2. And we know they're correct because Ellen White agrees with this in the Great Controversy. Ellen White agrees that the production of this chart was a fulfillment of prophecy. Then we read on, if the chart was a subject of prophecy, and I'm saying it was, those who deny it, they leave the original faith. So if you deny that this chart was a fulfillment of prophecy, what have you done? You've left the faith. Has our church denied that this chart was a fulfillment of prophecy? It has. It has denied it's the fulfillment of prophecy a long time ago. And if they denied it was fulfillment of prophecy, what has the church done? They've left the faith. And they left the faith before any of us were born. In fact, we were born into a church that isn't even following the original faith, and none of us knew it. And so when someone stands up and says, this church isn't even following the original faith, nobody can believe it. Nobody can believe that it could have gone so far, so bad, and they've never been told this before. How could that have happened? How do we know that we've left the original faith? Because we no longer believe what?
The doctrines of that 1843.
We no longer believe that that chart was a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, on that chart are many, many doctrines. Many doctrines. And how many mistakes are on that chart? Do we know?
Zero.
Sorry?
I've never heard of that chart.
Oh, we've never heard of the chart. So, let's go to early writings.
Oh, well then, wait, oh.
We're just looking at one chart at the moment. Let me go here. Early writings 74. So we're in Early Writings, page 74, paragraph 1. This article was written in December 1850. We saw that. This is now going to be, what we're going to read here, is a statement by Ellen White, and this is September 23rd, the same year. This is also written in 1850. So the husband and wife are both going to be writing about this issue in 1850, just before or around the same time when this second chart is being produced. It's the same kind of time frame. Now, I don't know when he actually wrote this article, because the December 1850 is when it's printed. So he obviously wrote it sometime before. So they're thinking about the same thing at the same time. September 23rd, in 1850, the Lord showed me that he had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people, and that efforts must be redoubled in this gathering time. In the scattering, Israel was smitten and torn, but now in the gathering time, God will heal and bind up his people. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to reread it. The Lord showed me that he had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people. So when is he recovering his people the second time? What time frame are we in? 1850. So in 1850, she's now telling us that the Lord is going to stretch out his hand and to begin to do what? To recover the remnant. But this is the second time he's doing that. When was the first time that he began to recover the remnant? When do you think the first time was?
1843.
Sorry? 1843. Anyone else have any thoughts?
When did William Miller start preaching? Or being told to preach?
Sorry?
When did William Miller start? When was God telling him to?
Well, his life work really began back here in 1798. You could mark that.
1798.
1798. What would you think, Sister Rachel? 1798. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if we were all here at the same time, because I know some people have come and gone. But we said, remember, in the history of the 1260, we'll go back to here, this one, the 1260, we've got a marriage, haven't we? Where did we see that marriage or this alliance? Revelation chapter 17. And this is this woman riding this beast, Revelation 17, in the history of the 1260. And what's her name? Sorry? Jezebel. Revelation chapter 2, verse 20. 2:20. So her name is Jezebel. And who does Jezebel marry? Ahab. So you see a marriage of a king and a queen, state and church. Ahab would symbolize, it was supposed to be how many horns? 10 horns from Europe. But 3 of them didn't want to play games. So she had them destroyed. And there were 7 left whom she married. Yeah, so we see this marriage, this alliance going on here. Her name is Jezebel, but she's got another name in Revelation 17. Babylon. I'll put it here. So her name is Jezebel or Babylon. And in 1798, what does God tell his people to do? Come out of her, my people. It says, come out of her, my people. Where are all these people located in this history? Which continent, which part of the world? Sorry?
Europe.
In Europe. So he says, come out of Europe and go where? To the new world. To the USA. Come to a place that you will have religious liberty and freedom. And the people that came out, what do we call them? The Pilgrim Fathers. Yeah, the whole story of the Mayflower and the Pilgrim Fathers and all that journey, that was a fulfillment of prophecy that all of us should understand and recognize and be able to explain. We spoke about Revelation 12. The earth did what? Opened her mouth and swallowed the flood and helped the woman, not this woman, but God's church, to escape from the serpent. And that escaping was when the Pilgrim Fathers left Europe and came to America. Yeah? So they came out of Babylon, which was the old world, and came into the new world. So as they come out of Babylon, what is God going to do? He stretched out his hand to recover the remnant of his people. And that happened here in 1798. He began to recover his people. We know there were problems in that history because the Protestant churches, what did they end up doing? Accepting or rejecting? They ended up rejecting him. They crucified afresh our Lord and Saviour. And only a remnant of those people were going to make it, and their names were the Millerites, who eventually became Adventists. Yeah? What happens in 1844? You had all these thousands of Millerites who joined the movement, accept Christ to come, and in October 22nd, 1844, what happens to all of them? The great disappointment, and the flock are scattered. Yeah. So let's read this. September 23rd, 1850, the Lord showed me that he had stretched out his hand the second time. Now in 1850, this is the second recovering of the remnant. The first was in Millerite history. Then she says this, and that efforts must be redoubled in the gathering time. So 1850 is marking the gathering time. That's what this chart is going to be used for, to begin to gather his people. It's a tool that's used for public evangelism. That's what this chart was used for. It was to draw in the people, to gather them. In the scattering, when was the scattering? 1844. Israel was smitten and torn, but now in the gathering time, God will heal and bind up his people. In the scattering, efforts made to spread the truth had but little effect, accomplished but little or nothing. But in the gathering, when God has set his hand to gather his people, efforts to spread the truth will have their designed effect. All should be united and zealous in the work. I saw that it was wrong for any to refer to the scattering for examples to govern us now in the gathering. For if God should do no more for us now than he did then, Israel would never be gathered. So we've got here from October 1844 a scattering, and then by the time you get to 1850, what's going to happen? A gathering. So the production of this chart, in combination with this chart, is going to be the tools that God's going to use to begin to gather his people. And in Habakkuk chapter 2, it says, make the vision plain upon table or tables. Tables, two tables, which were symbolized by these two tables here. There were two of them. The Millerites didn't see this at the time. They just said, tables, it's all the same thing. They produced a singular table, but the work hadn't been accomplished. There was more work to do in the 1850 chart. Then she says this, I have seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and that it should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them, that his hand was over the chart, like this, and hid a mistake in some of the figures of the calculations, so that none could see it until his hand was removed. What mistake did they make that James White told us about a moment ago? He said they were expecting the Lord to come 1843, and when he didn't come, they tarried, they went to sleep, then they awoke at the midnight cry, then they knew he was going to come in 1844. Remember that passage that we read that James White said? And that's what she's referring to here. She says they had made a mistake. And what was the mistake that they made? the date. They thought it was 43 and it was 44. They've made a mistake in their calculation in some of the figures. How many mistakes was it? Just one mistake from here to here. And it says that the Lord put his hand over that, which means the Lord was directing this. Yeah. Well, how did James White express it? Because he expressed the same thing but slightly differently. He said it was necessary that the 43 chart. Sorry, no, he didn't say that. It was necessary that 1843 should be first published. Sorry, should be the first published time in order that the vision should tarry, or that there should be a tarrying time in which the virgin band would sleep. So when it says it was necessary, who made it necessary? Who made it that way? God did, because he hid his hand over a mistake so that no one could see that they'd made a mistake as they're approaching it. And here in 1843, then they realise they've made a mistake. So after they've made the mistake, what do? They go to sleep. And then here at midnight, there's a cry made, and the hand is taken away, and then they realise what the mistake is and how to fix the mistake, and they know it's 1 year difference. It takes you to 1844. Does that make sense? So there's only this one mistake. So let's go back to what he said. He said, if you don't believe that this chart was the subject of Bible prophecy, then you have left the original faith. Now, as I say, on this chart there are many doctrines. And what did we read in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1? Departing from the faith. And if you depart from the faith, what do you believe? The doctrines of devils. Because you've been seduced by spirits. And I'm saying this. On this chart, we'll put it up on the screen in the next presentation. There are many, many truths. One of them is up here, 2520, and another one is down here, and it's Islam. There are other doctrines here as well. Another important one is this one just here, which is the daily. Now today, our church rejects this doctrine, this doctrine, this doctrine. They reject them. They say they're not part of, how could we call it? The doctrine of Christ, if we could use that phrase. It's not truth. That our understanding as a church, our original understanding was wrong, and therefore they should not be part of the faith today. So we don't believe that these three subjects, the 2520, the daily, or Islam, is part of the faith of God's people today. They recognise it was part of the faith when this chart was produced for the Millerites. So James White says this, all of these Advent believers, they were standing on what faith? The original faith. So the original faith said, this is correct, and this is correct. And if you don't believe these ones, then what have you done? You've left the original faith. And I want us to see that today Adventism has left the original faith. And you have to decide, was the original faith correct? Or was the present faith correct? Which is the correct faith? The one we hold today or the original one? And that's what the argument is over today. What is the original faith? Because if you don't know the original faith, you're going to get into problems. Because how do you know what's going to happen at the end of the world? By seeing what happened at the beginning. So if Adventists at the beginning believed all of these things, because they saw them as fulfilled in prophetic history, then you would expect at the end of the world, what? That all of these things would come into prophetic history or prophetic fulfillment at the end of the world. But if you reject one of them, say if you reject this one, and you look at the world today, at the end of the world, and what do we see on the newspapers every day? Islam. everywhere. But if you've rejected the original faith, if you don't believe it was part of prophetic history, when you see it today, what would you say about Islam? It's a distraction. It's got nothing to do with anything that's important. And we should focus on the more important things, which are what? What's the most important thing that conservative Adventists push and teach? The mark of the beast. The issue about Sabbath, the mark of the beast. And who gives you the mark of the beast? Pope. That's why conservative Adventists track the Pope. They want to know everything the Pope's doing. And should we be doing that? No. Tracking the Pope is not going to teach you where you are in end time prophecy. It will not do that. We've made big mistakes in our understanding of end time prophecy because we've left the original faith. Now, Islam isn't the only one. There are many, many truths that we've misunderstood, rejected, and lost sight of. Many rules and principles that now make us blind in our ability to understand what's going on. But what we do, and I don't mean this disrespectively, is like a broken record. I know half of us don't even know what a record is, because yes, we do. Some of us older ones know what a record is. We're like a broken record. It keeps on going around saying the same thing because we've left the original faith. We no longer understand how to interpret what's going on in the world today because it doesn't connect to our reading of the Bible. Because when we read the Bible, we're like the Jews. We read, how would Paul say it? We read amiss. So everybody reads the Bible. All the Adventists read the Bible, of course they do. But when they read amiss, which means what? If you read amiss, incorrectly, you don't understand what you're reading. And all we can see is the Bible only talks about the papacy all the way through. And it's not that straightforward. It isn't. The Millerites understood all of this, and they gave us all the keys that we needed. And we just threw them away and rejected everything that they taught us. And so now we're in big trouble. Let me explain it this way. What's Daniel chapter 4 about?
That's Nebuchadnezzar.
Do we know that? Nebuchadnezzar thinks that he created Babylon. Yeah? He was proud. And he receives a warning. He receives a dream from God. And he doesn't know what the dream means. So he goes to Daniel. He says, can you explain what this dream means? And when he tells Daniel the dream, Daniel doesn't want to tell him what it means. Because Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar are good friends. So he says, you have to tell me what it means. So he says, okay, I'll tell you what it means. He says, you're a proud king. And you need to stop being proud. Because if you do, God is going to punish you. Do we know what the punishment he receives in Daniel chapter 4?
No wilderness
For?
40 months.
6, 7 years.
Your mother said?
7 years.
For 7 years. So he goes into the wilderness for 7 years, or 7 times. Before he goes to the wilderness for 7 times, does he understand what the warning is? Yep. He understands. He's been warned, and he understands it. He says, yes, I won't do it. Then one day, sometime later, he forgets everything, like we all do, because we're rebellious. He stands up and he says, look at this beautiful city that I created. And as soon as he said that, then he hears this voice, I warned you not to do that, and now you're going to be punished. And now he's going to get punished for 7 times or 7 years, and he's going to be turned into an animal. And then he gets restored. Yes? Mm-hmm. What's Daniel chapter 5? What's the story of Daniel chapter 5?
Belshazzar's feast.
Belshazzar's feast. Who is Belshazzar? It.
Nebuchadnezzar's grandson.  'Cause 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 '
Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. This is his grandson. So let's go to Daniel 11. Chapter 5. And we'll pick up from the first part of the chapter. What's happened?
He brought all the gold out of the house of God,
Mm-hmm.
and they drank wine out of them, and they praised the gods of gold and silver and brass, iron, wood, and stone. And he was with all of his princes and wives and concubines. And then there was a hand that came and wrote on the wall.
So there's a handwriting on the wall, and what does the handwriting say? Mene, 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 tekel, upharsin. Yeah? So all of us know that story. And now Daniel's going to explain to him. So let's go to verse 22, 5:22. Daniel speaks and he says, "And thou, his son, grandson, O Belshazzar, has not humbled thine heart like your grandfather did, though thou knewest all this." And if we go back, what did he know? Go back to verse 21. No, we'll go back to verse 20. "But when his heart, Nebuchadnezzar's heart, was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory for him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses, and they fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will." Verse 22, "Thou knewest all this." So what's Daniel saying to Belshazzar? This is Nebuchadnezzar, and this is Belshazzar. Did Nebuchadnezzar know about the 7 times that he was going to receive if he became proud? He already knew that. So he receives the warning before the punishment. So Belshazzar now is drinking from the cup, eating from the plates, and then what happens? Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Does he know what this means? He has no idea what it means. Once it happens, now the punishment's going to come, and he doesn't even know what it means. And what does Daniel say to him? You knew what? All of this history, and yet you didn't learn from it. Yeah? He said, you were warned in the history of your grandfather what was going to happen, and you didn't know. So you rejected what happened, and now when this punishment's coming, this warning, you have no idea what's about to happen, but I'm going to tell you. Does he have an opportunity to change? Because as soon as Daniel is going to explain to him, then what happens? We're going to go down to the verse, and we're going to pick up from verse 29. So Daniel's told him everything. Let's go to verse 25. "This is the writing that was written, Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, and this is what it means." Verse 26. "God hath numbered thy kingdom and done what? Finished it. Any chance of reprieve? No. Thou art weighed in the balance and found wanting. Thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians." Verse 29. "Then Belshazzar gave all this reward to Daniel, even though he didn't want it." And verse 30. "In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain by Darius the Mede." So once this mini mini tickle your fasting happens and he doesn't even know what it means, it's too late. He's going to be killed. Is it important to understand the history of your grandfather? Yeah? Because if you don't understand it, what's going to happen to you? You're going to be killed. You have no excuses. Adventists have no excuse. And what have we done? We've departed from the original faith, and now when punishment is going to come upon us, swift and fast, and we're about to be killed, you can't make any excuses. Because God is warning us. Before this event, God is going to warn us to give us an opportunity to get out of the mess. Unlike Belshazzar. He actually gives us an opportunity. But Belshazzar had an opportunity. He knew this history. All Adventists know Millerite history. We all know the 2300-day prophecy. We know all of these things, but we've departed from the original faith. And for those of us who have departed from the original faith and don't know that we have, he's going to give us an opportunity to make good. He knew about the 7 times, and he didn't. This is the Millerites, and this is us. It's 2 separate histories. This is the history of the Millerites, and this is the history of us. What do we say a time is? A year? You okay with that? Yeah? So, how many days in a year? 360. If we did 7 times 360, we all know what that calculation brings, or we're not familiar with it? I'll do it a different way. What is 3.5 times, times, and dividing of time? How long is that? 3.5 years. Yeah. Do we know that that's the 1260? So 3.5 and 3.5 is 7. So 1260 plus 1260 is 2520. So this 2520 that you've heard about, I think you have heard about, most, I don't know, Adventists who haven't heard about it, is right here in this chapter 2520. Did the Millerites know about the 2520? They preached it, they understood it, yeah? Did Nebuchadnezzar know about the 2520? Yep. Do Adventists today know about the 2520?
No.
They have no idea even what it means. Why don't we know? Because we've departed from the original faith. Exactly that. We've departed from the original faith, and we don't even know what any of this history means. It's a death warrant. It's worse than sad. Let's take all of this out. Who likes maths? Besides you. Meeny, meeny, tekel, upharsin. These Chaldeans and the king, they didn't know what any of this meant. Yeah? They had no idea what it meant. Do we know what it means? Some of us do. I know that. Yeah, I'm sure you do. So we're in Daniel chapter 5, and we're in verse 25. And so we've got these 4 words, meeny, meeny, tekel, upharsin. And we want to try and understand what these words mean. How would we know what the words mean? We'd go to our Strong's Concordance. Would we do that? Would you come here and check our concordance? Yeah. If we checked it, it would be in here. I'll do it on my computer, but maybe I'll spend 2 minutes doing it in the book. When I first became an Adventist, I bought one of these. Didn't have a computer. These programs weren't available, and I spent many, many hours with my Strong's Concordance.
It's Greek to me.
It's Greek to you. It's Hebrew to me. Okay, so Mene is M-E-N-E. So I've got 2 men, and I'm going to go to Mene. Okay, so you probably can't see it, but I'm in men here. Men, and if you go down, there it is. M-E-N-E, Mene. At the back, you might not be able to see it. And it says it's in Daniel chapter 5, verse 25. And the verse says, written, Mene, Mene, tekel upharsin. So there it is, Mene, Mene. Yes?
Yes.
And in verse 26, the same word. And what Hebrew number is it?
4484.
4484. So this is 4484. So then what you do, you go to your book, you've got 4484, you go to the very back, and it's going to have the Greek and the Hebrew. So here's the Hebrew. It says Hebrew, and we're at 1525, so we want to go further forward, and we want to go to 44. We're at 4043, 45, 4484. 4480. Is that it? 4484? So we're at 4484, and it says, oh, there it is, Mene, and it's a Chaldean word, and if you read it, it'll tell you what it means. So I'll read it here for you. It means pass, part of, it means to be numbered. And then it refers you back to another word, which means to count, or a point, or to number, or to set. So I'll do it on my computer. So this is Strong's Concordance. Strong was a man. His name was Mr. Strong. And he tells you what their definition means. There are many other people who have written these kind of dictionaries before. So I'm going to read from another one. It says, a mene, it means a weight or measurement. Yeah? So it's a physical weight. It weighs something, and it's going to tell you how much it weighs. It says it weighs 50 shekels. So I'm going to put here 50 shekels. Has everybody heard of a shekel? Yeah? A shekel is like $1, like $50. It's some kind of monetary value. So if that was 50 shekels, what would this be? The same. And the word tekel here is just a Babylonian way of saying shekel, because they're very similar languages. So a tekel would be 1 shekel. And if you look at upharsin, mene tekel upharsin actually means half a mene. And what would half a mene be? Half of 50 is 25 shekels. So if we add all of that up, what would that come to?
126.
Everybody agree with that? 126 shekels. Now, if this was $126, and I said, how many cents would that be? How many cents would that be if it was $126?
1,600 cents.
Yeah? Because you just times it by 100. We can all see that. But in the Hebrew coinage system, it's not 100, the subdivision. So we're going to go to, you can find this in a number of places. We'll go to Ezekiel 45 verse 12. And we want to get their equivalent of cents. They don't call it cents, they call it gira. So, someone tell me how many gira there are in a shekel.
20.
Are we all there? 45 verse 12. And the shekel shall be 20 gira. Do we all see that? So a gira, let me put it this way. There are 20 gira equals 1 shekel. So let's turn these 126 shekels into gira. How would we do that? 1 shekel is 20 gira, so 126 shekels would be, how would we do that calculation? 1 shekel equals 20 gira. Therefore, 126 shekels would be 126 times 20. Would that be correct? So, let's do that calculation. Who can calculate that? You can do it a number of different ways. 126 times 20. I would normally make it 1260 times 2, but we'll do it this way. Sorry?
25, 20. Yep.
Yeah? So right here, this mini tickle your farsin is 25, 20, which is the same information that were given to the Millerites on Nebuchadnezzar. But they understood it. He understood it. And he ended up being saved. Didn't he? But we don't. We don't understand what the 25-20 means. And we're rejecting it. And so, when we go so far as to start desecrating the Lord's instrumentalities, what's going to happen to us? We're going to be killed. Because we have not gone back to our history and understood it. Because we have departed from the original faith. So you see this 25-20 in both chapters. This group already understood it, and this group don't understand it. So the 25-20 is a big issue, big subject, an important subject that Adventists don't understand. And we could go through all of these doctrines and show why they're important for us to understand. I mean, this one is obvious, isn't it? How long has this been going on for? This war between the East and the West? Not just, I don't mean that far back. I mean in our local history, in our local, generation.
600-700 years.
No, in our generation.
Oh,
When did the conflict really get serious?
2001.
Yeah, 2001. It got really serious, and it's got worse since then. Yeah, everyone's life in the whole world has changed, and Adventists are sitting there ignoring all of this. They have no idea what's going on. Because what are we doing? We're tracking the papacy.
Yeah.
We're tracking the Pope, seeing what his activities are.
You hear so much of that even, on 3ABN and Motherwell.
Yeah. It's because we don't understand our own history, our own faith. Whether you're conservative or liberal, you're in the same problem. Okay, let me go to... Let me read this to you. Last day events, page 125, paragraph 3. The Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. The leaders are concealing the true issue, and many who unite in the movement do not themselves see whither the undercurrent is tending. They are working in blindness. What does all that mean? The Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. What is the Sunday movement? Yeah, it's the push or the drive to make Sunday the day of worship. This Sunday movement, it's now making its way in what? In darkness. That means you can't see it. Can't go into the newspapers. Can't even go to Google. You can't track what's happening with the activities of the Pope to know how close the Sunday law is. Because it's all happening in darkness. The leaders in this movement of Sunday are concealing the true issues. And worse than that, many of them who unite in this movement do not themselves see whither the undercurrent is tending. So these leaders in the upper echelons of this movement, they understand what's going on, they're concealing the truth, but the rank and file people who join these Sunday movements asking for a rest day, whether they're unions, asking for more free time on Sunday so it can be a family day. You've heard all of those kind of thoughts and ideas. They don't even know where they're going with this. They don't understand what's happening because they're working in blindness. So if we want to understand how close we are to the Sunday law, do you think it's going to be useful to track the movements of the Pope? It's not going to be clear. In fact, perhaps the strongest Pope that's been around for the last 30 years was who? John Paul II. And everybody, when they were looking at him, thought the Sunday law must happen in his time period because he's the strongest Pope that's been around. You know, he makes his presence felt. And who came after him? Sorry? Ratzinger. What did they didn't like that name though? They changed his name to Benedict. Yeah, that's a nicer name. And he was kind of like a nobody. Did nothing, did he? Really? He strengthened the work of the papacy, but really he wasn't doing much, and everything kind of went dead. And now this new Pope Francis, comes up, and now he's kind of a go-to Pope. Is that phrase that you use? The go-to person? It's a go-to Pope. And what's his real agenda now? Ecumenism. And he wants to focus on what? The environment. Isn't it what he's pushing? The environment. And the rich countries need to subsidize the poor countries. We need to wipe away their debts. Yeah? Think that's a good idea? For the rich countries to wipe the debts that the poor owe them? No. Because he doesn't want to do what? Doesn't want to allow America to be great. He wants to bring America down. So we can see if you look at the popes, they're not really doing much effectively. You know, even though we try to claim that they do. In fact, most of the arguments that Adventists have about Sunday law are how old? I mean, some of them are like 100-year-old documents that we pull up, saying, the Catholics. We go to the Catholic Catechism, and they have this question and answer, which was the day, and they said, we know it was Sabbath, but by the mark of our authority, we changed it into Sunday. I mean, this is like documents that are over 100 years old. All of the arguments that we have, if I can use it this way respectively, are threadbare. They don't have a present truth application or a present truth bite or a message. because we're looking at the wrong place, because we've departed from the original faith. The original faith would have guided and directed us. And now when people are being raised up to teach the original faith, they're scorned by Adventists, by and large, especially the leaders. They're scorned to say all of this stuff is foolishness. And I've just shown you that Belshazzar's problem is that he's going to reject the history of his father. And his father understood about the 2520 and was saved. Belshazzar rejects it and he's not saved. All of these things have an impact upon us. The issue of the daily, which people say, doesn't matter what view you have of the daily, because Ellen White says it's not an important subject to fight over. But you have to understand the context in which he's speaking. And then you have to understand what the implications are if you have a wrong view of the daily. And you have to manipulate the scriptures. I mean, you have to manipulate Daniel chapter 8, verse 11 to get the daily. I don't know if we know the issues about the daily, but Adventism today believes it's the ministration of Christ in the most holy place. This is what the daily is, his daily ministration. And to do that, you have to manipulate not only that verse, but the other 4 verses in Daniel to make them say something that they don't say. And you have to depart from the original faith. Because what did the original faith say the daily was? See, this is the problem. I mean, we don't even know. So if you don't even know, for me to tell you anything, to say that they're wrong and I'm right, you're thinking, I don't know anyway. Because I could say anything. And can we see the danger that we're in? Yeah? What I do want to remind us is age doesn't save you. And what I mean by that is we can't say, I'm too old, I'm too tired, this is too difficult, this is too complicated, this is for the younger people. This affects every single one of us, whether you're young or old. If you read Ezekiel 9, it tells you, you reject what's happening. Those 5 men are warned to slay everybody, young and old, married or single. It makes no difference. No one is going to be spared. Each of us has to tax our minds to the utmost, according to the ability and the talents that God has given to us. But none of us are going to be excused that we're too young or we're too old. And the problem is, and I'm only here for a few more days, to present some of these truths becomes difficult because we don't even have a reference point that we can come and meet on. So if I was talking to a group that had heard about the daily, we could argue about it and I could show why I believe what I believe and what you would believe. But if you've never even heard of the argument, it becomes problematic. So I want to tell you that the Millerites believed that the daily was a symbol of the pagan powers that have existed from the very beginning of the controversy. So all of these pagan nations, and what's the first pagan nation that wars against God's people? Babylon. Then Medo-Persia, all pagan. Then the ultimate is pagan Rome. They even put it into their name. Well, we did. Pagan Rome. And then it all shifts to papal Rome after that. Sorry, Greece. I missed Greece. Shouldn't do that. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, then pagan Rome, and then papal Rome. So this daily are all of these pagan powers. That's what they represent. That's what the Millerites believed, the original faith. And today, we no longer believe the original faith. Today, we believe that the daily is the work of Christ in heaven. And is Christ's work in heaven good or bad? Good. Was pagan Rome good or bad? Bad. So we've turned something that was a symbol of something, we've turned a symbol that was satanic into a symbol that is godly. And vice versa. Yeah? It's a big problem. It's departing from the original faith. It's scary. So we've made mistakes on this one, the 2520. I mean, people get disfellowshipped over this one. People, if you believe it's 25-20 and you preach it and you don't desist, you'll get disfellowshipped, depending on what conference you live in and how aggressive your pastor is. People get disfellowshipped over this one, and we all know about Islam. So these are just three things that we've departed from the faith over, and they have huge implications in our relationship to our church and our church's relationship to God when we're trying to teach the third angel's message. Okay, we'll have a break. Unless there's any questions. Are there any questions?
Just down to 25-20.
Oh, I was going to ask that too. Does that bring us to, my calculations could be wrong, 2024?
No idea.
Okay.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and mercy. We want to ask and pray that you would be with us, that you would bless us, and that we might have a clearer understanding of your word. It's my hope, Lord, that those who have participated in this study can see that your people have indeed departed from the original faith, that we no longer understand our left hand from our right hand. And even now, the Sunday movement is going forward in darkness. We're looking at the wrong people in the wrong places at the wrong time. How can we understand the times in which we're living, Lord, unless we come back and stand on the platform of faith? Lord, I want to ask and pray that you would be with us, that you would help us to understand the truths of the times in which we're living, so that we and our friends, our family members might be saved. In Jesus' name we pray.